welcome to this episode 194 of Frame and Reference. You're about to drop into a conversation between me, Kenny McMillan, and my guest Toby Oliver, ACS, DP of Apple Cider Vinegar. Enjoy. Or I see a lot of people on online because all my friends are cool. I see online a lot of kids talking about like, hey, I'm really, really shy and don't like people. Like, how can I make a movie just by myself? And I'm always like, you don't. And then everyone gets mad at me. Like, I'm not saving this kid thousands of dollars in heartache,
Yeah, no, but you are, because, there's a really, especially if you're a director, trying to get projects off the ground, you've got to have a bit of chutzpah. You've got to have a bit of, you can't be that shy.
Yeah.
You can't be hiding in your closet. Or your bedroom. You've got to get out there.
Well, and I think that, the current media landscape includes a lot of people like streaming or doing YouTube and stuff, which is very, which
that's true.
Is a thing, but you can't watch all of those and go, I would like to be a filmmaker.
Yeah, from that.
Yeah, that's different.
It's not, it's not evidence. It's something, and it's great and it's valid and it's, contemporary, but it's not the same thing as making a narrative movie.
Yeah.
That's something that takes a long time, I think, to hone your skills and your experience and your life experience, and all these things can go together. Some people are great off the get-go. They just seem to be born to be able to make they're storytellers and visual storytellers. And there's other people that are, they get better and better as they go on, Well, some people are great filmmakers when they're, in their 70s or 80s or whatever.
Sure. That was one thing that I was going to say. Ed Moore, I had Ed Moore on the other day. His episode is going to come out later. You got to see the list of people that are in the queue for coming out, because it's all
right.
Yeah, Last of Us is going to be next week with Catherine Goldschmidt.
Oh, cool.
Silo.
Excellent.
4 DPs from Silo.
That show's really picked up in popularity, didn't it? I think when the first season of Silo came out, it was like, what Silo? What's that? And then now it's like this.
They just
even over here in Australia, people are really binging it and everything.
Well, it's good sci-fi, and the books are already done, so they have a path.
Yeah.
So right. I think it's easier to do that than Severance, where it's like, all right, where do we go with this? There's no source material.
I know. How did they figure out what to do the second season? It was sort of like, gosh, what do you do? But it's really clever. It's fantastic.
Oh yeah. But Ed was saying, well, first of all, I'll just tell you they're starting to shoot the 4th season of Silo already.
Wow.
Yeah, they told me the 3rd one's wrapped and 4 they're starting in like August, and I'm just like, what is your guys? Do you just live in that set now?
Clearly.
Yeah. But Ed was saying that with all the gatekeeping of cinematography and stuff, he was like, if you get a shitty coffee at 4 a.m. under a leaky tent in the rain in a parking lot, you're a cinematographer.
So. Yeah, it can take all shapes and forms. Actually, being a cinematographer these days, you could be anywhere, anytime, doing anything, really.
Yeah, I was wondering because obviously, like, I grew up here in LA. I'm around the film industry. Well, technically the Bay Area and then LA, so a lot of film history here. But every time I interview Australian cinematographers, there does seem to be this element of like just getting it done that I think even here, or like New York or maybe even London, interviewed plenty of British cinematographers, but like I feel like all the Aussies, like it will get done. It's like, it's just like, there's no, a roadblock is just a bump, it's like, we're gonna muscle through this. Yeah.
I guess it's a bit of the way you grow up shooting here. Well, grow up as a cinematographer working here in Australia with the constraints of budget and time and all the things that a lot of people around the world have to deal with. But it's pretty cut and dried here in some respects, especially if you're doing television, because, but not only television, is that, that's the day. You got a 10-hour day. You have to shoot everything that's on the call sheet. Could be 10 scenes, could be 15 scenes, could be 4, depends what it is. You have to shoot it by that time because there is no overtime, or only on very special occasions, right? So
Really?
so there isn't that that, I think in the States, and I've worked in the States quite a lot as well, obviously there's, they allow for a bit of flexibility because sometimes you have to, and sometimes people end up doing really long days because that's just how long it takes, right? And in Australia, they just don't have the budget for that. So they just, if the director and the DP don't shoot the call sheet in the day, then those scenes aren't in the show. You have to then cut around it because they're just not going to be there, because they're not going to come back and add days and shoot them again later or any of that stuff. So there's a certain discipline you learn. You have to make your days. And if you do get a little bit of extra time and there's a bit of this, or we can do a bit the other day, then great, bonus. We got a bit more time, awesome. But the discipline is you have to do that. And I guess as a DP, if you were not making your days and it was sort of part of your department's problem, then you just don't last. Yeah,
you get fired.
It's really pretty much, well, more or less, or you just don't get asked back or whatever it might be. But it's just there's not a lot of leeway there. So I guess with Aussie DPs, when you're working on a bigger show and you've got more time and space, then you really, that you can get to point B by the end of the day, but we've got extra time. Oh, great. Well, we can do all this extra stuff, it's not always, as black and white as that, but that's sort of where you're coming from, is that, I just have to make the day. There's no question. It's just, right. That's what's going to get done, So, you go into it like that. So
it's very
so I guess over the years, there has been, producers sometimes think, well, Aussie TVs are great because they're very fast, and there's truth in that. That's because we just had to. It wasn't. You didn't get much choice in the matter. Yeah.
I think it was.
It's funny.
Judd Overton, I think, was the guy who.
Oh yeah, I know Judd. I know Judd very well.
He's great, but I started to get that sense from him where he was just like, I don't know, I work really efficiently. So I don't think he said that specifically.
Well, you have to. You actually think about you're faced with a big call sheet and you're going into a location, and obviously you think you've thought about how you're going to light it, and that's all happening usually in a pre-light, because often in Australia, especially with television, there's no rigging gaffer or rigging team. So they don't go in there the day before or 2 days before and set it all up for you, and you just walk in and it's all kind of rigged. There's no money or time for that. So you get in there early on the day. So it's a bit more like an indie film type thing. You get in there early and you do your pre-light. So it also affects the way you would light something. You're not going to put in this giant rig, with 16 cranes and a whole lot of stuff, because there's no time for that. So you figure out an efficient way of doing it. Like Judd said, you think of it, okay, this is the efficient way I'm going to be able to complete this day and leapfrog and everything else that you do. So it's, you just learn over the years that's what's expected of you. And so you figure out ways of doing it. Yes.
Yeah. Have you sort of discovered any, I suppose, cheat codes for working efficiently, but maintaining a, look that is acceptable in a cinema?
Well, it's usually, you have to achieve the look, especially nowadays, because the expectation of how good something looks, I think, has gone up since when I started out. Back in the 90s or whatever, there was a bit more leeway, and it didn't have to, it was low budget. It could look a bit low, but it was okay, But now what you see is what you get, all the big monitors around and all of that. It has to look absolutely, schmicko, perfect, and look like a real movie or look like a real show. So you at the same time of being very efficient, you have to maintain this level of quality of your work. That also can't really dip down and become, shoddy, because then it will, that's going to stand out. So there is ways you're leapfrogging, where you're always got a team preparing the next scene while you're shooting the scene that you're in. Sometimes you make sure you've got extra gear or an extra camera body or something can be rigged for something that's coming up before you get to it. So it's basically thinking ahead very clearly in detail about what's coming up. So obviously you've got to be helped with your director. You don't want a director who's just changing their mind, wishy-washy on every scene, during the day, because then how am I going to preempt any of that? So you got to work together as a team, and good directors over here who obviously work in Australia are on the same. They're on the same page as you. They've got to also make their day because the director is also underneath the exact same pressures. So because they won't get asked back if they keep going over and not dropping scenes and whatnot. So you work together, and with your first AD, of course, who's responsible for the schedule. As that little team, like on every production, that's the little team of three people kind of driving, steering the ship when you're on set actually filming. But you've got the imperative that there isn't really any overtime, or not much. So you've just got to be really efficient, all the three of you together, and the whole that's part of your job. So I work very closely with an AD, from the get-go. Even if I'm on a much bigger production where you've got a lot more time, it comes out of habit. It becomes you've got to team up with your AD. Otherwise, you can't just sort of say, "Well, I didn't know what was coming," or well, that's you actually, you got to be like peas in a pod.
Well, if I'm really like interested in what I'm doing, especially, but pretty much on any film shoot I've been on, I can get time blindness really fast, and I love a good AD. A bad AD will just, in my opinion, will just bug you about being on schedule. A good AD keeps you on schedule.
Absolutely.
And I love those ones where they're like,
"Oh, no, 100%. Like if you do get, like you say, to start drifting off into getting really involved with something that's going to be really beautiful, and the AD says, look, that's great. We've really only got half an hour, so just got to, you go, oh, right. Oh, yeah. I'm with you. Okay, camera rolling.
Yeah.
Okay. Because sometimes, sometimes as a DP, you're lighting a scene, and you're 90% of the way to kind of what you wanted to achieve, but there's that extra 10% you really want to just, and you can be fiddling around, and sometimes you just let go of that. And I guess that's part of it too with experience. You know how you can get to a point pretty quickly because you've done it so many times before. And the icing on the cake, sometimes you just got to let go of the icing on the cake because we got to get the scene shot in that time, to make sure we can get to the last scene of the day, which is more important, whatever it might be. You can make those little mini sacrifices in your head. You know what? I could have put that extra light up there, and that would be great for that. For the actor we're walking through that. But you know what? It'll be fine. And let's shoot. Let's button on. So you make those decisions constantly all the time.
It's funny. I've been asking probably I've done like 10 interviews in the past week. So
oh wow!
It just feels like a flowing conversation. So
that's
people
continuous.
Yeah, I just hope that I'm not repeating myself too many times. But one question that I have asked a few people, which you kind of just touched on, is like thinking about efficiency, thinking about lighting and stuff, especially on a television show. Restricted timeline, usually restricted budgets compared to a feature generally.
Sure.
What are those like nice to haves that do get hacked off?
Yeah, I think, look, sometimes it's about, you've got to get in there, and often you've always lighting for two cameras, right? And often one of the key things, of course, is, are we going to cross shoot? Are we going to cross shoot the dialogue where we've got A and B on each character at the same time? Now, you have to be prepared to do that, I think, whenever that could happen. And sometimes that happens on even a big feature because the director just might want to really, may not be the norm in that movie, but there might be a scene where, I really want to cross shoot this because there might be some ad-libbing or whatever it could be. You've got to be ready to do that at any time. That's always a compromise to some degree because you're facing, obviously your backlight's going to become your front light and so on and so forth. So things like that, sometimes you've just got to, if the director really wants to do that, I don't put up a fight and say, it's going to be a compromise, blah, 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 blah. Because I think as a DP, you're there to service the director's vision, and also you've got to service the script, you've got to service the production, you've got to service the schedule. There's a whole lot of things you've got to service. And I think the challenge then becomes, okay, well, I'm stuck with having to do cross shooting here, but how do I make it still work? How do I make it still look good and still look like part of this show that, where it's not always, we're not always cross shooting. And so it's those little challenges where you say, look, I'm going to give up, that finessing because I won't be able to do in this situation. Yeah. And sometimes it's even in a scene where you've lit the space and the actors land, and they just end up not where you thought they were going to be. You thought they was going to play over near the window, and we had this, it could have been even natural light or whatever it might be coming in, and this is going to look good, and I can do it so quick. It's all ready to go. And they end up doing it over in the other corner, and the director says, this is really great because there's this sculpture here, and I want to do it, whatever it might be. And you go, oh, well, I haven't really lit for that. So, and it just depends how much time you've got between when that decision gets made, which might be in the blocking rehearsal, and then when you need to actually roll. So I love it when actors turn up and they're clearly not in costume, they're not ready yet, and they turn up and do the blocking and go, oh yeah, that's great. Yeah, all these great ideas. And okay, I've got 15 minutes.
Right.
Because they come back and they're all dressed and they're ready to go. So it's sort of like depending on, the situation. So but when they turn up and they're fully made up, fully dressed, ready to, we could shoot straight after this rehearsal, which of course happens as well, especially in TV. Then sometimes I'll say, look, we're not really ready to do that. If you want to shoot, and if it's really not going to look great, it's going to look bad. I say, look, I won't be ready to shoot. If you go over there, it'll be another 15, 20 minutes. But if we can sort of stage it a bit closer over here, we can shoot straight away. And often a lot of the directors will go, oh, okay, great, let's do that, because they want more time to shoot. So it's always a bit of give and take and a little bit of cajoling and, suggestions, things like that in those situations. But yeah, you've got to still be the king of compromise sometimes, just to keep everything moving, I find the flow on set is really important, that we can keep shooting and flowing, and that we don't get bogged down with some really slow either grip setup. Sometimes you say, let's have the camera coming in over the top of the thing. And I'm looking at going, yeah, that's a nice idea. We didn't think about it, but I'd talk to my key grips. What's that going to take? It'll be about 40 minutes. And I go, because that's in the truck and that's around the corner, and this, it might be in this location where the grip truck is actually, a little way away. And so you'd sort of go, then I would just say to the director, look, we can do that shot, but it'll take 40 minutes. Or maybe there's a way we can keep shooting, move on to something else, and have set up that shot, in the other room, and maybe come back to it. So that's where it's good to have a third camera body or something where you can set up another shot like that, and then you can jump back onto it. And we still get the shot, but we just don't get it in the sequence. We don't end up having to wait around for 40 minutes because that kills you.
Right.
When you've got momentum and you're shooting, and so it's always a little juggle of things like that. You don't want to be the guy that says no to your director all the time and say, oh no, I can't do that. Oh, it's going to take too long. You've always got to figure out a way, but present it, just present the options.
Yeah, give them the probably obvious no, and your option to be like,
and the option of yeah, exactly. So you've always got to be thinking about what those things are.
Yeah.
What those alternatives might be. But
I bet LED and wireless DMX really changed your life then.
Yeah, I have to say. It is one of the things. But you know what? You just got to shoot faster, but because you can.
Right, because they expect it.
But you do have this incredible control that I've been shooting for a long time. I started out shooting with redheads and blondies and, out of the backs of cars and all that kind of stuff. The most basic lighting kits you can imagine. And now we have all these LEDs, all remote controlled off an iPad or a console. And it's extraordinary what you can do. It's just, I think perhaps young DPs starting out today don't realize the difference between what we had to work with, what was considered 100% normal, the way you would light, say back even in the 80s when I started out.
In the early 2000s even. I mean, didn't come out till 2011, 2012.
Correctamundo. So the 90s was pretty traditional as well. You had tungsten lamps, you had HMIs. You couldn't really control them except tungsten lamps in the studio if you had big dimmer racks and stuff like that. But so today, of course, it's really incredible what you can do. And of course, it allows you to work faster, you can dim, adjust, color, all of those things, of course, can be done in seconds if you've got the right people, in your team to do that. And everyone's across it now, so it's become a really valuable tool in your toolbox to be able to and make those kind of and work with them. And so of course you want to work with LED pretty much 100%. You still use HMI for the really big guns, but even then that's starting to change too. It's some of the LED stuff that's very powerful.
I've seen some crazy moon boxes.
Yeah.
The two actually, so my friend Marcus Forder made one for this show. What was it called? It was a show, Constellation. He said he was filming in the Arctic, and so it wasn't even snow. It was just like thick air almost. And so he said he had 120 Vortex 8s, not aimed down, but aimed out. And it just turned the entire sky into a softbox, essentially.
Yeah, right. Into the kind of the fog.
Yeah. And I was like, that's a fascinating idea. And then yesterday I was talking to someone about their show, and they said, it was about, I told you, there's so many interviews, they're all running to and luckily
but they all running together.
But Marcus's was months ago. It was this kind of like Western show, and they just did like 80 Titan tubes in a softbox, and that was and I'm always fascinated. Actually, you're the perfect person to ask this, because I'm always fascinated about people's approach to night work, because everyone likes the night. Most of us, big soft source for the day, make people look pretty usually whatever. But at night, it's everyone has their own plan, and especially with like get out and stuff. Like, how do you approach night?
Well, it depends on the situation. I don't always use exactly the same thing. And sometimes it depends on the conditions of where you are on your big night exterior as well. Up here, right now I'm in Queensland, Australia, Brisbane. And last time I was working, I'm in prep now, but last time I was working up here, we had some night exteriors. And I was going to use what I'd been using in LA a lot, which was a machine, like a Condor with two S360s on it.
Right.
So the big sky panels, and that was becoming a bit of a go-to thing when I was working in LA, because you didn't have to build a giant box, especially when it wasn't a big rig that was going to be there for days or nights on end. It was kind of just for one night. But you got this really great controllable softer source over a street or whatever it was you were doing. So that used to be a thing. But then when I talked about doing that in Queensland, they said, "Oh, no, mate, we don't do that up here. Nah, because it's too wet. Well, it rains all the time. And the 360s are not waterproof. So it's the same." So they just said, they just use vortexes, like you mentioned before, that Marcus had. So cream source vortexes up in a bucket, hanging off a thing. So however many you might have, 8 or 10 or whatever, off a machine, however many you could hang off a machine. It doesn't matter if it rains, 100% waterproof. And also if it's windy, you don't want a big soft box around it, because that'll just blow off and the whole thing will fall over. It'd be terrible. So you just have them raw, but you might have a little bit of diffusion in them. But because you can spread them out, you're basically creating the idea you can sort of play them out. You're creating the idea of a softbox without it actually being in a softbox. So that tends to be what I do now, rather than building. If something was quite specific and you were coming back to something night after night and you really wanted a a sort of nighttime sort of soft glow from above, then you might rig up something more substantial. But often I've been in and out lately with a lot of those things, and vortexes has become a bit of a go-to thing in rigs. But you'd also might have HMIs up there as well, 4Ks, M40s and stuff, just punching through and throwing highlights here and there into the night scene, so you can get a bit of depth. So that's often a thing.
I'm definitely still a sucker for the sort of late 80s, early 90s wet street HMI, clearly in view. Like there's the neighborhood shot and there's just a massive blue.
Yeah. And you see the reflection all the way up the street in the puddles of your huge light. Yeah, and often, sometimes that's the thing. That's what you want to do, because you've got this deep background street, and you need to just show it. It just needs to be visible on camera. It might be a very dark street or whatever, so you just put up a 12K or something, like a Arimax or something way off in the distance, and just bang it in from a long way away. I did that down in San Pedro in LA. Actually, I had 2 Arimaxes up on a cliff top for lighting up a beach area at night, just with a low level I think that was for Dead to Me, for that show. And so you can use very traditional ways like that, and then you might have up close around your actors another machine with the 360s or the vortexes or something. You've got the traditional HMIs way off in the distance, giving you a bit of shape to the landscape, which is half the time's out of focus anyway. So it's sort of, it all works, But so it's a combination. Yeah.
This is kind of a pivot, but I just remembered I grew up on the Jackass show and stuff. You worked with Jeff Tremaine on a project?
I did work with Jeff Tremaine on The Dirt, which was the narrative movie about Motley Crue, like a rock biopic. And Jeff somehow was the director of that, I think, because he knew the guys. He knew Motley Crue, and he ended up directing. And that was, I have to say, Jeff's a pretty funny guy, and it was one of the most fun projects I'd ever worked on. It was just crazy and very silly, and I think captured probably the tone of that band and those guys.
Sure.
And they were behind. I mean, Nicky Six and Tommy Lee were all totally behind the film, approved it. So I think it was pretty close to what they thought their lives were like back in those days.
Or what they want you to think it was.
That's how it was, yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, there was that many women there. That was great.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. So it was pretty funny, and Jeff's, he's a lovely man and very hilarious, and I never was involved with his Jackass things, like that's his whole, that was a whole
you'd still be here if you did.
That's right. I'd probably be, with a plaster cast in a wheelchair or something. But
I was just.
But that was a lot of fun. Yeah,
I was just fascinated by how, like, the idea of him directing because I'm sure he's directed other things, but I feel like Jackass is like wrangling cats, and then there's which a lot of directing is, but
yeah.
I was just fascinated by what his approach was to like an actual film, like if he was good at it or if he took
he was
different.
Well, it was interesting because he kind of he really loved the parts that in The Dirt, of which there were that were sort of pranks and were stupid things that the Motley Crue guys did, like set a hotel room on fire or something like that. So as you'd expect, Jeff was very excited about those scenes. Other scenes that were more like talking about, their life or their future, how they're going to get the band going. Those scenes weren't Jeff's, forte, but he's smart. So he surrounded himself with people like me and the AD and, producers who were very experienced with narrative film. So we were able to, steer Jeff and help him put together all of that stuff. That wasn't, he hadn't had a ton of experience doing narrative. But you know what? You surround yourself with the right people and you've got some fun ideas, you can do it, 100%.
Yeah, but before we get into the TV show, I did want to say, first of all, I'm sure it's not out yet, but I'm sure Megan 2 is going to be a hit. People fucking love that movie. But
yeah, it's going to be good. It's Megan on steroids in some ways. It's like amped to the max. Yeah. Yeah.
But I was looking through your IMDb, and you shot probably one of my sleeper favorites that my girlfriend was just watching, and then I like sat down and which was Barb and Star.
Oh yeah.
I
Yeah, yeah,
That
yeah.
movie took me by surprise. That was phenomenally funny and just
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, it was really nutty. I mean, I have to say, Kristen Wiig and Annie Mumlow, who wrote it and obviously starred in it, they wrote the script as well. They're just really nutty.
Mm.
They just think of this stupid, funny stuff all the time. And it was really, I mean, they're lovely, lovely people to work with, and it's all very generous and everything on set, but they are just quite nutty. And so that was interesting for me because it was the first time I'd done one of those, a comedy of that ilk, where it was very much a true, I mean, very wacky script to start with, but a lot of improvisation as well, which is a lot of these comics, as I discovered, they don't just do what's written on the page. I mean, they do that, and then they spend upwards of another hour or so doing alternate funny lines that they just sort of think of as we roll, you know. And so that was very much, I was talking before about cross shooting. That's an example of a movie, quite a decent budget kind of big-ish movie, where cross shooting was basically every scene, like depending on the scene, but any scene where there was a fair bit of talking going on between Kristen and Annie, or any of the other characters, we'd cross shoot it because they'd do the lines, and then Josh Greenbaum, the director, say, okay, well, now we'll just keep rolling, and now we're just going to try a few things, and they'd all go, oh yeah, great. And that would go on until the card in the camera ran out.
Right.
Like,
Until the lights started blinking.
that would go on. Well, no, that'd go on until 45 minutes, and we'd have to say, oh, we've only got a minute left on these cards. Okay, we'll just have a little break for reloading, and we'll reload. Because I think we're on Sony Venice, so they had about a 45-minute runtime. Yeah, so I hadn't really done a lot of that kind of thing before. It's probably like the style of Judd Apatow style of comedy, where there's just lots of improvisation, and it was great. I mean, it was kind of fascinating to see them at work in that way. And sometimes the stuff, I mean, there's so much stuff that that got sillier and sillier. That's probably not even in this very silly movie. It was so silly, sort of. So I had a lot of fun basically working on that. Yeah, and the director was lovely. Josh had a great sort of natural feeling for this kind of material and stuff. So
yeah, I've found that hanging out with comics made me a better filmmaker, and the
right.
reason being, when you get a bunch of stand-ups, or probably any type, what do you call it, improv or whatever, when they all stand in a circle, we're just chatting, and then someone will say something vaguely funny, and then the next like 3 minutes is everyone just kind of tagging
that funny thing with something even more funny or sillier. Yeah, that's
Until
kind of like a bit like what the ad-libbing was when we were rolling. Yeah, there's a bit of that kind of thing.
Well, but I find that
was hilarious.
Oh, it's amazing. But what I have found is, if you're like not really great with a dead silence, for the longest time as a DP, I was so like I knew how to do the work. I didn't know how to do people, necessarily.
Yeah.
And I found that everyone likes it when you tag. Everyone's funny at some point. Everyone will say something probably unintentionally that's funny. And if you acknowledge it and tag on it and keep going, they suddenly they love you. It's like that.
Yeah.
I've found that comics know how to hang out.
Yeah, exactly. And in fact, the hanging out is the best part, right?
Yeah.
So it's funny you mentioned on that. I just used to focus on the work, but I wasn't so great with the people. And I think a lot of DPs, over my long career, when I was starting out and I was quite young, it was just the work, man. I mean, just stay away. This has got to be perfect. And I'm the DP, and this is going to, and you've got to realize you're not on your own on set, just with you and your camera and your light. It's the whole world of people who are all collaborating together, and you've got to be part of that as a human being, even though your work is, very complicated and, very important and all the rest of it. Everyone's job is like that. Everyone's job is very important. And it's true on a film, or a show. Everyone's little part has to be put in there. Otherwise, that little piece is missing, the thing doesn't work at all. So I think that's a really good note. It's like, be good with people as well as being good with your cinematography.
Well, and it kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier, which is like the standard is so much higher for images, right? And it's easier to get those high quality images. Everyone,
it is because you've got great cameras, you've got incredible LED lighting, you've got beautiful monitors, you can see exactly what you're getting. When I started out, of course, I didn't ever have video split. So you had to kind of wing it because you're shooting on film and no one could see it except you in your head. And it's a very different world now. And I think, but what makes a good DP, now, if that's all so much easier,
the people skills.
It's the communication and the ability to, plan ahead and, shoot the schedule and all of those kind of things, make your days and get on well with your team and all of those kind of things are equally as important. It's almost, it depends what level that you're shooting, but it's a given that it's going to look good.
Right.
As they bring you in as a DP, well, of course it's going to look fine or it's going to be great or one of the, in between a range of being totally acceptable. But what else are you going to bring to it?
Right.
What, is it your management? Is it getting on well with people? Is it a creative collaboration? We know the cinematography is going to look good, but, how else are you going to contribute to this show? And that's part of, why people get hired, I think. Depending on the show, I guess there are still projects that are very, very technical and you need to be able to bring those kind of skills to something. Maybe some of the things that, say, your friend Marcus does. I know he does some of those very VFX heavy productions. So obviously not every DP in the world can step into that role that he's doing, So there's still horses.
Did you see September 5?
No, I haven't seen it yet.
Oh, that's the last one he shot.
Yeah, right.
But you'd mentioned something and then I lost it. That's fine. That doesn't have to be it. But yeah, the point being, personally, I think it's almost easier to learn people because film is only 100 some odd years old, but people have been around since we can, forever. So and
it's language.
Yeah. And if you can get good with people, as long as you have your work, and you're nice to get along with, you'll get hired over someone who's a pain in the ass to get along with.
I think so. I think so these days even more. I think back in when I first started out, you did find there were quite a few assholes that got work, but that's because they could do it and they could shoot film and they get a good result. Right. And because not many people, you couldn't just walk off the street and do that. And they might have been an asshole, but people just put up with it because the result was great and no one else could really do it, or not many. Yeah. But that's changed now. You can't get away with that anymore.
Speaking of assholes, apple cider vinegar.
Yes, she's a piece of work. That woman, Belle Gibson. Yeah.
Well, it's the thing that came to my mind was, if I had a nickel for every person who faked like medical stuff for money, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice.
Oh, right. To you personally?
No. I just mean like in the world, there's been like a few people, right. There's like the Theranos lady. Well, I guess she didn't fake a syphilis, but there was fakery going on there. But it's a wild story. I had no idea that had happened. And when it's real. When I went to go watch it on Netflix, I had seen all the bars were full, and I guess my girlfriend watched it without me before I got there.
A lot of people binged it, like they just watched the whole thing almost in one sitting or 2 sittings or something. Yeah, because it's a bit addictive, I think. that show. Sure. If you get drawn into that story, and I think it's quite
it's one of those
had good responses.
It's got the not in the same way, but the sort of velocity that what is it? Uncut Gems. You know how it's like
Oh
where
yeah,
it's
yeah.
stressful watching someone try to keep all this up in the air.
Yes. Oh, yeah. That was good too. Yeah, but and it has that sort of momentum where it's just sort of more tumbling over itself, and it just as you go through the episodes, it gets worse and worse, more extreme, more extreme. She lies on top of the previous lies to, it's like she just doubles down
Right.
over and over, and it just gets she ends up, this is a disaster.
Yeah.
But we had a lot of fun making that too. I mean, I guess what drew me to that show was that content. It was the fact that it was a true story about this woman who is a charlatan in the health and wellness sphere. And I think there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation in that area in the world online, and there's a lot of people telling you stuff that just isn't not true. Right. And there's a lot of people buying this stuff. There's a lot of people believing all of this stuff. I know people who do. And it was sort of like, well, it'd be nice to work on a show that's hopefully going to be entertaining, but actually says something about what's going on. It's still going on. It wasn't just her. She was not just one isolated little thing that happened once. It's an ongoing machine of disinformation.
It's getting real bad here in the U.S. I'll tell you what.
That's right. You've got that fellow RFK Jr. He's kind of almost the epitome of all of this stuff. He's on all of these conspiracy sites and all of this stuff. Yeah. And so the story of Mel Gibson's kind of like the beginning of that. Back 10, 12 years ago. Anyway, that really drew me in. I thought, this is going to be a fun show with some people I know who are great, as like the director Jeffrey Walker, who I knew, but it's actually about something. It's about this real thing it's really important actually in many ways as well. So that just drew me in, as well as the team and the production company and all of those things are very highly regarded. So.
And I noticed watching it. Oh, go ahead.
No, go on.
I was going to say, I noticed watching it. There's, again, I think it has something to do with the feeling of velocity, but going just the handheld with zooms. That's not funny, because like obviously The Office has that kind of style or whatever. But something about that gave me anxiety. I don't know why.
Well,
something about the visual language.
The actual reference was Succession. So
sure.
Have you seen Succession?
Of course, yeah.
So, and that's sort of not funny either. That's kind of pretty anxious. So that show. So Jeffrey Walker, the director, actually sort of the one in our very first meeting or whatever, he said, look, the feeling I want to try and get out of the camera is a bit like what they're doing in Succession. So I, made sure I saw all of that because I'd only seen a few episodes at that point. And so that's why we went with the zooms. We went with the largely handheld camera, and the little, maybe not quite as much zooming as they did on Succession, or certainly not The Office, but
little,
just little reframes and little creeps in, just maybe on moments of dialogue where it just sort of, she was saying another lie or whatever it was, and that was a lot of fun. In fact, I found, because I was operating on that, because when I'm working in Australia as opposed to the United States, I'm able to operate the camera as a DP. And that's, especially when it's a handheld camera, of course, you kind of can put quite a bit of yourself into the work, into the actual physical, tangible, sort of visceral operating. And so that I found that really rewarding, actually, to be able to do that. And I had a really great B operator who was also, we were all, totally the same page. Matt Dobson. So it's sort of like that team, because we're always shooting two cameras of that stuff. That became a really important part of the look of the whole show. And I think it worked well with, like you said, the velocity of the show. It's very, very fast cutting. I think when we were grading it with my colorist, he was saying, there's like nearly 1,000 cuts an episode. Normally in a show, there's maybe 600 cuts. Or 500 cuts. So he said, so we were like, this is going to take twice as long to grade, because, you grade, cut a shot at a time, right? And we got a bit of extra time to do it, because so luckily, and we were able to really finesse that. It's funny, you have this very little amount of time to maybe to grade something, and then you just get that little bit more. It's like one extra day. It made all the difference in the world,
Well,
per episode.
I've heard a bunch of DPs say they sometimes they're not even invited to the grade. That kind of happens outside of them sometimes. And it's like, I can't imagine.
That's bad. Yeah. I mean, I always have it contractually in my contract that I'm invited to the grade. If I can't actually be there, then because I'm on another show, then fine. And I'll, do something remotely or whatever I can. But I try to put it in there because you can't not. My worst nightmare is you work really hard on a show or a movie, and then at the end somehow they just go off and do it themselves, and it's all different and looks terrible. I mean, that's just like your nightmares. You wake up in a cold sweat about that kind of thing, and it has happened to me many, many years ago when I was starting out. I think a couple of times that sort of happened where I couldn't be there, or I wasn't there, or I should have been there, and I wasn't invited, like you say. And stuff came back that was like, you're putting that to air? That's in the show? That terrible, terrible grade or whatever, and like horrific.
Yeah.
Because they made a decision about, it's got to be a lot brighter or whatever. And it's like,
always that, isn't it? It's always, they always make it too bright.
Yeah. Well, that's usually the thing. They think, you've done this very moody thing and it's quite mysterious, and then it reveals, and they say, no, we just want to see everything at the beginning, and then it's bright and holding up and it looks awful. So, yeah. Got to watch that out. Got to watch out for that. So,
what was your shooting schedule like? Like, how many days did you have for the 6 episodes?
Look, it was around, I think for 6 episodes, it was around 65 days, 66 days. So I guess we had 10 days and a bit, 10 or 11. I think it was around 11 days per episode.
That's not terrible.
It wasn't terrible. It was, and we had resources. We had a second unit, not full time, but for a bunch of it as well, and we needed it. It's because of the nature of that story. It's a little bit different to a regular scripted drama, because it's so in a regular scripted drama you might have 3 or 4 main locations, and it's kind of written that a lot of stuff happens at the house, a lot of stuff happens at the police station, and a lot of stuff happens in a few different scenes that are exteriors. But a lot of then you go back and on a given show, you go back and spend a fair bit of time in 1 or 2 places, because that's good for the schedule. It's practical, and you just write it so the story happens in whatever. But when it's based on a real life story of a real person that happened, that a lot of people kind of know about, that happened over time, to some degree, you've got to reflect that. And that means way more locations, way more like that real life people don't necessarily just stay in one spot for 10 years. And so we had a ton of locations. We had, in our 66-day shoot, we had 60 or 70 locations. So you can see why we needed a second unit. And also, because some of them, there was, 1 or 2 locations we were there for a few days. I think the main house, we were there for six or 7 days in one place.
Yeah.
But that means a ton of moving around and little grabs here and there and throughout the rest of the show, to get all these little vignettes that happened in the real world in all these different places. We shot most of it was shot in Melbourne, Australia, and we shot for about 7 days up here in Queensland because we needed beaches and jungle, and we needed different environments and stuff. So it was really pulled together from a lot of disparate things. So yes, a decent amount of time per episode, but we had a hugely ambitious schedule. Of all the stuff we had to grab. Well,
and we kind of touched on the grid, so I guess we'll get back to that in a second. But speaking of efficiency, like the lighting in it is pretty naturalistic, but it still has shape and everything. Like, were you kind of doing like documentary style, just like get something up, we got to go, or were you able to be a little more like?
I was able to plan it out. I mean, it was supposed to be it was naturalistic, obviously, but it was also it just had a slight heightened thing to it all. I mean, some of that was done with the LUT and stuff that I was able to use in the camera and the grade, we were just able to sort of enhance stuff a bit because it's quite a poppy show. It's, you know, it's quite colourful and it's sort of coming at you, and it's sort of, the idea was it's sort of reflective of social media. So there's a lot of, well, that's the other thing. We had second unit. We also had social media unit because, you know, in the show, there's all the stuff you see on phones and the stills, and that we didn't just get that off the internet. You got to make all of that stuff. So we had a dedicated unit, and they're pretty much full time shooting all the little iPhone videos and stills, so many stills that you see going through, and all the little, putting together all the little mini websites and Instagram pages, which weren't really Instagram, it just looked like Instagram, of course.
Right.
And that was a whole world unto itself. That was working sort of alongside us as we shot. So with the style that we were shooting is sort of a little bit sometimes reflective of that kind of poppy sort of Instagram sort of style thing. But yeah, I mean, again, it was like we didn't have pre-rigging crews or rigging gaffers or any of that. It was all, you know, you get to a new location, you get there a bit early, you set it up and you work your way through the day. So you don't, you very much, what I did have was plenty of prep time on this. I had a good and long time from when I knew I was doing the job. I had it much longer than usual, actually. So I knew I signed up to do the job probably 8 months before we started. So at least 6 months before we started any prep. So that gives you plenty of time to start thinking about it and start talking about it. And then when I started the prep, we had decent 8-week prep period. And so we were pretty well, and we were able to go to all of our locations, you know, so many of them, so that the scouts were very varied and extensive. But we were able to go to those places more than once and pre-plan, you know, pretty clearly what we're going to do. Because when we got there with the whole crew and we didn't have much time, you know, set up the lighting in an hour and a half and then we've got to shoot. So you had to be well prepared. But we had the time to do that. So all of those things sort of became possible as long as we were, like, as we were talking before, efficient. We had to be efficient with that process. Yeah. So both between me and Jeffrey and our AD, Nathan Croft, we had to be very, very, you know, we had to work together as a very, very tight team that was about efficiency. But at the same time, we're telling this big story, and we wanted to give it that style, you know. Yeah. So it was, you know, it was a challenge, but it was a good challenge.
Yeah. What do you, because I primarily work in documentary right now, so I'm always fascinated by it. And I know you used to shoot doc in like the 16 days, right?
A little bit, yeah. I used to shoot a lot of short films on 16 mil, and I shot a couple of docos back in the day on film, and but I haven't done any for a while. The most recent one I did was in LA, but that was a doco about the roller called Roller Dreams. It's about the roller skaters down at Venice Beach in the 70s. Yeah, and it was 70 in the 80s. There was this amazing roller skating scene down in Venice Beach that sort of got disbanded. They actually kind of the city wanted to get rid of these people.
Damn roller skaters.
Yeah, but they were a huge attraction. People would travel and go and hang out and watch them perform, and it was all kind of the sort of off the cuff stuff. But it was that was a cool little doco. But that's probably the last one I did, which was like 7-8 years ago, I guess. Yeah.
Well, the reason I bring it up is because more and more, at least I am asked to make a documentary look like a movie. And so whenever there are these more naturalistic shows or whatever that come out, I'm always fascinated by like how are you doing that? You know, like what? Yeah. And I mean, like specifically, like what's your like lighting setups for some of these? You could potentially pull off as like a documentary guy.
Yeah, well, because with Apple Cider Vinegar, we were 100% on location. There was no studio sets that were built for any of the places, so we were careful about what locations we chose. For example, in the early part of episode 1, she's in the interview with her PR guy that she just met in LA, and it was sort of like we looked at a lot of office buildings in Melbourne, like what's going to look good. And we saw these offices that were that's sort of how they were. They were sort of all painted and kind of had these sort of elaborate color schemes and quite, mood lighting, and it was sort of like, oh, this is pretty good. And they were kind of offices that there was no one in there because they were like just temporary, like a company can come in like a startup or something and be there for 4 months and then leave and whatever. Right. So they were kind of perfect for filming purposes, and they happened to be empty. We had a few different options. And so really it was going in there, okay, what's here that exists? The down lighting and the accent lighting and stuff, the windows, curtains. What's here that exists that we can use? What do we need to change? We're able to go back and scout it 2 or 3 times, I suppose. And also I worked very closely with Melinda Doring, our production designer, because her job wasn't building sets and designing sets. What her job with her set decorator was, okay, how do we rejig these real locations to make them work for the show? And you think, oh yeah, that's pretty straightforward, whatever. But choices you make about what kind of curtain you're going to put up can affect the cinematography incredibly. So we're a couple of floors up in a building, so I couldn't have in a really busy main street of Melbourne outside. There's no way I can block it off and have machines and have lights coming in through the windows and stuff. So, but there's daylight coming in through the windows there. So it was about choosing the right kind of curtain where you can still see and still lets the daylight in, but it won't let too much in that's going to keep changing the lighting in my scene dramatically. Right. So if sun suddenly hit the curtains, the ambience would go up, but I could get away with it. I could either adjust it in camera, or we could fix that in post or whatever. But when you're looking at the windows, a bit of sun hits and it looks nice. It looks good and they're the right color tone. I think, but Melinda actually went in and changed the curtains from the ones that were there. And we talked about, how thick they should be and what kind of material and all that kind of stuff. So you do things like that. So it's totally the real location, but you're just going in and making little changes. And the downlights in the wide shot, I use the downlights as the source because they're all in shot. So we're super wide down the end of the table. You can see the whole ceiling and all the lights and everything. But you turn off the ones above the camera and you block them off, and you just have the ones there, so you get a bit of shape. And then when you come in close, you do that. You bring in your normal movie lights. So it was a case of really being careful. Okay, we'll do the wide shots first, then we'll move in usual stuff. But because you're in a location, like if I was on a set, if that was a built set, I could have all the lighting built into the top of the set perfectly, and it would work for the close-ups as well. It wouldn't change much. But you had to then, with something like that, you had to either do the wide shot first or do it last. Sometimes we did it last. So we'd set up and we'd do the close, start up close and come back. And then at the end, you've pulled all your lighting out, and it's really just the prac lighting that's doing the job.
And you didn't replace the bulbs? You just
didn't need to.
Oh.
Didn't need to. Because I think they were LED. It's quite a modern office. So it was a case of just finding the right level because they had dimmers. I don't think we had them up full stick. I think they were just dimmed down a little bit. And we didn't. And sometimes I might go into a location where I've got practical lights like that and I've got to use them. We can't change the bulbs, they're LEDs or they're tubes or whatever they might be. Right. And if they're a particular color, then I'll just say, okay, well, I want them to look a certain way, so I'll adjust the camera till I get the right warmth that I like with those existing lights. And then when all the light I bring in, I just adjust it to suit what that is.
The
things
color
like that
meter has changed my life.
Yeah, exactly. I need to. Yeah. I mean, I tend to just do it with the monitor, though my gaffer always has a color meter, and they'll go and do, more exact readings when we need to, when we're trying to match a practical or something that's a little bit finicky. But yeah, you match because you've got LED now, so great. You can match that practical lighting and make more use of it perhaps than you used to be able to. Because if it was the wrong color back in the day, you'd be like, oh, we've got to pull out all the bulbs or turn them all off and relight it completely or whatever. But you don't have to do that as much now. And I find that's a real time save, especially if you're in a practical location. You got action happening in the foreground. You're seeing way down this big long corridor or this big giant room. Just turn on the real lights, see what they look like. Or turn maybe some of them off and leave some of them on. And, oh, yeah, that looks all right, actually. it's not too bad. So we'll go with that, and we'll just light our actors in the foreground, separately. And then it's so much quicker than having to go in and change all the bowls and relight the whole thing. And, you can do that when you've got all that time in the world, but we didn't have that. So, but I think these days, it is a lot easier when you're in those tough situations, that there's ways of making it look good that perhaps we didn't have before, and also the camera as well. The cameras now are so incredible. This shot was shot on a Alexa 35.
It's such
a
nice camera.
It's got such an incredible ability that, in situations where you do have, in the past where you've got big bright windows that are blowing out the scene and you kind of want to see out there, that's where it excels, because before you had to put up nets, or you had to light up the inside like insanely bright just so you could see the beach outside. That's the whole reason that we're here, right? This particular location, for example, you want to see the beach. But it's just so bright out there and so dark and all this. And you'd have 4Ks bouncing off ceilings and stuff. You don't have to do that anymore. You can do it with LEDs inside. And then the camera will hold the outside, the Alexa 35. And you can bring it back in the grade. It's quite incredible. We never had that before.
I think it's like 9 stops of highlight.
Yeah,
on
the tension. It's got nearly 2 extra stops from the original Alexa, which was already the best,
right,
of highlight retention. So it's so things like that are really helpful, especially if you're in a studio and it's all fully controllable. You don't need that so much because you just dim it down. It's all going to be great. But when you're a camera like that, if you're on location, and you're in those situations, it can be worth its weight in gold.
Yeah, I would love an A35 with the variable ND from the Venice.
Yes, built in with all those NDs. Yeah. That is the best thing about the Venice is all the NDs, but I prefer the A35 for the sensor.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, we're running out of time, but I would love to have you back on when Megan comes out.
Sure.
And we could just
100%. Love to. That's going to be out June 27. Yeah, cool. I got that burnt into my brain. Yes,
I bet. Yeah, on a press tour, you're just like.
Well, I think I did the grade for the trailer too. So,
cool.
That was
even the trailer is fun. Like I was just in the movie theater the other day, and I was like, "This is great."
Oh, you saw it? Yeah, great. It's got to be fun. It's a fun movie. They're actually we're doing the final color grade on it is about to start actually, and I think they're still shooting a few little bits and bobs to put in there, inserts and stuff.
Wonderful.
Nothing like last minute.
Yeah. Well, I know. Well, that's the other nice thing about digital, right? Is like the DCP can go out. 3 days later, versus having to knock out all these films. Or
you don't have to do all the prints and all of that stuff. Yeah, no, exactly. So it does give them more flexibility, but it also gives the director more,
anxiety,
more time to just keep going.
Yeah.
As well, I guess it's the same with every project these days.
Yeah. Well, it was really lovely talking to you, and
likewise. Thanks, Kenny.
We'll keep it going.
Awesome. No, that was a great chat. Thank you.
Frame and Reference is an Albot production, produced and edited by me, Kenny McMillan. If you'd like to support the podcast directly, you can do so by going to frameandrefpod.com and clicking on the Patreon button. It's always appreciated, and as always, thanks for listening.
My stomach will thank us. It's apple cider vinegar.